The Jedi Council felt it first, a disturbance without shape, without pull, without any explanation Force could provide. Master Yoda's ears twitched in the center of the circular chamber, high above Coruscant's endless cityscape. Around him, 11 council members shifted uneasily in their seats, each reaching outward through the Force, each finding only silence where answers should have been. This wasn't darkness, it wasn't light, it wasn't even emptiness. The Force simply had no word for what had just entered their galaxy. Outside the temple's windows, the planet city hummed with its usual chaos. Millions of beings, thousands of speeders, the distant roar of commerce and politics. But inside this sacred room, the guardians of peace felt something they hadn't experienced in 1,000 years. Complete metaphysical confusion. Disturbing. "This is," Yoda murmured, his ancient voice barely above a whisper. Mace Windu's hand instinctively moved toward his lightsaber hilt, though he didn't know why. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood near the chamber's edge, his beard catching the amber light of Coruscant's endless sunset, his mind racing through every archive entry, every legend, every warning about cosmic disturbances. Nothing matched. The Force had always provided context, whether dealing with Sith Lords, ancient artifacts, or unexplored regions of space. But this time, when the Jedi reached out with their most refined senses, they encountered something worse than a wall. They encountered irrelevance. The Force wasn't blocked, it simply didn't apply. And in that moment, every Jedi in the temple felt the first tremor of an existential earthquake that would shatter 10,000 years of certainty. Then he appeared, not through a door, not through the Force, not through any form of arrival that made sense within the laws of their reality. One moment, the center of the council chamber was empty. The next, a humanoid figure lounged in midair, as if reclining on an invisible throne, dressed in a crimson Starfleet uniform that meant nothing to anyone present. His face carried an expression of supreme amusement, dark eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that comes from witnessing eons of lesser beings taking themselves far too seriously. "Oh, this is delightful," Q said, his voice echoing through the chamber without the need for amplification. "You actually believe you're the center of cosmic significance." He gestured casually at the assembled masters, and 12 lightsabers flew from their belts, igniting simultaneously, hovering in a perfect circle around him like captive stars. "Tell me, does destiny get boring after the first 1,000 prophecies?" Every Jedi in the room rose to their feet, combat stances assumed, the Force flooding their bodies with enhanced reflexes and battle-ready awareness. Mace Windu's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Identify yourself. How did you bypass our defenses?" Q tilted his head, studying Windu with the detached interest of a biologist examining a particularly stubborn insect. "Your defenses," he snapped his fingers. Time stopped. The lightsabers froze mid-rotation. Their plasma blades turned to silent columns of suspended energy. Master Plo Koon's hand hung motionless halfway to his belt. Shakti's Leku were captured mid-sway. Even Yoda, ancient and powerful, stood perfectly still, aware, conscious, but unable to move through the crystallized moment. Only Q moved, standing from his invisible seat and walking between the frozen Jedi like a curator in a museum of living statues. "You sense the Force, you manipulate the Force, you let the Force guide you." Q continued conversationally, circling Obi-Wan's frozen form. "But what happens when something exists that the Force simply cannot explain? What happens when your cosmic GPS encounters a being from a reality where your rules are just quaint local customs?" He reached out and adjusted Obi-Wan's beard like an artist fixing a sculpture. "I am Q. I am from the continuum, and your force." He made a dismissive gesture. "It's adorable, really, a lovely little metaphysical framework for your galaxy. But calling it cosmic balance is like calling a pond an ocean." He snapped his fingers again. Time resumed. The Jedi stumbled forward, expecting resistance that wasn't there, their lightsabers clattering to the floor, as if suddenly released from invisible hands, the blades winking out. Master Yoda's eyes narrowed, centuries of wisdom processing the impossible. "Part of the Force. You are not. Beyond it, you claim to be." Q's smile widened. "I don't claim anything, little green sage. I simply am. Your force is a river, quite powerful within its banks. I'll grant you. But I come from the ocean." He gestured toward the windows, and suddenly every being in Coruscant froze mid-step. Speeders hung motionless in their flight paths. Politicians stopped mid-sentence in the Senate building kilometers away. Clone troopers on distant battlefields stood like statues, and through it all, only the Jedi Council remained aware, witnesses to an power that operated on rules their metaphysics couldn't even acknowledge. "For 10,000 years, Q continued softly, you've built a civilization on the certainty that the Force connects everything, guides everything, explains everything. But what happens when your entire philosophical foundation meets something it cannot touch?" Before any Jedi could respond, Q vanished, not through teleportation, not through Force techniques, but through simple narrative exit, as if he'd never been subject to the constraints of presence in the first place. The frozen city resumed its chaos. Speeders continued their journeys. Politicians returned to their debates. But in the Jedi Council chamber, 12 of the galaxy's most powerful Force users stood in silence, each wrestling with a revelation that struck deeper than any Sith blade. The Force had not protected them. The Force had not warned them. The Force had not even been able to perceive Q as a threat, an ally, or anything in between. For beings who had dedicated their entire lives to sensing disturbances, this absence of information was more terrifying than any dark side corruption. Because it meant one thing: the Force was not absolute. If you're ready to watch a galaxy built on destiny confront a being who rejects fate entirely, make sure you're subscribed, because what Q does next will force every Jedi, every Sith, and every Force-sensitive being to question whether their powers were ever as cosmic as they believed. The question isn't whether Q can destroy the Star Wars galaxy. The question is whether the galaxy can survive knowing the truth about its place in the infinite. And that answer begins not with a battle, but with a simple, devastating realization. The Force reached outward into the void where Q had been, searching for context, searching for meaning, searching for any fragment of understanding. And for the first time in recorded history, the Force found absolutely nothing. The test had begun, and the galaxy had no idea how badly it was about to fail. The emergency council session began 3 hours after Q's departure, but the tremors had already spread throughout the Jedi Order like cracks in transparent steel. Every master, every knight, every Padawan who'd been meditating during the incident felt the same thing. A blank space in the Force where understanding should have been. In the archives, Jocasta Nu frantically searched through holocrons dating back to the Old Republic, looking for any reference to beings that existed outside the Force's reach. She found nothing. Ancient Sith texts spoke of dark side entities. Jedi histories chronicled Force anomalies across 100,000 worlds, but nowhere in 25,000 years of recorded galactic history was there a single mention of something the Force simply couldn't perceive. The librarian's hands trembled as she closed the final holocron. They weren't dealing with a new threat. They were dealing with a new category of existence. In the council chamber, Mace Windu addressed the gathered masters with his characteristic directness. We need to classify this entity. Sith, ancient force wielder, extra-dimensional being from wild space. Obi-Wan shook his head, still processing what he'd witnessed. He's none of those things. A Sith Lord manipulates the Force. This being, Q, he operates independent of it entirely. Master Yoda's voice cut through the speculation, heavy with the weight of his 9 centuries. Beyond our understanding he is, but understand him, we must. For if the Force cannot touch him, then powerless against him, we are. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Jedi Order had faced extinction before, wars with the Sith, galactic conflicts, betrayals from within, but always they had the Force as their foundation. What happened when that foundation revealed itself as incomplete? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Across the galaxy, on the war-torn planet of Christophsis, Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano led their clone battalion in a desperate defense against separatist droid armies. The battle followed a familiar pattern. Republic artillery hammering droid formations, clone troopers advancing under covering fire, Jedi deflecting blaster bolts while coordinating tactical strikes. Then, without warning, everything stopped. Not slowed, not paused by some Force technique, simply stopped, as if the universe's play button had been pressed into freeze. Anakin stood mid-leap, lightsaber raised, suspended 3 meters off the ground. Ahsoka hung horizontal, mid-roll behind a barricade. Clone Captain Rex was frozen with his DC-15 blaster mid-trigger pull. Even the energy bolts hung in the air like deadly fireflies. Blue streaks of plasma captured between muzzles and targets. The only sound was footsteps. Q walked through the battlefield like a curator, through an art gallery, hands clasped behind his back, examining the frozen combatants with academic interest. Fascinating, he murmured, studying a battle droid caught mid-collapse. Its circuits already failing, but its fall suspended in temporal amber. You've industrialized warfare to the point of poetry. Clones versus machines, organic slaves versus mechanical slaves, and you call this? He paused, reading the designation painted on a Republic gunship, Operation Liberation. The irony is exquisite. He approached Anakin's suspended form, tilting his head to study the Chosen One's expression, determination, fury, and something deeper, fear. Ah yes, you're special, aren't you? The prophecy boy, the one who's supposed to bring balance. Q's smile turned cold. Tell
me, young Skywalker, if I removed your destiny, would you still be a hero or just a violent child? With a laser sword, with a casual snap of his fingers, time resumed, but only for the Jedi. Anakin crashed to the ground, rolling instinctively before realizing the battle was still frozen around him. Ahsoka landed in a defensive crouch, her twin lightsabers humming uselessly in the silence. What? Who are you? Anakin demanded, rising to his feet, every instinct screaming at him to attack. But the Force, usually so reliable in identifying threats, offered nothing. Not darkness, not light, just void. Q turned to face them, and for the first time, Anakin Skywalker, veteran of 100 battles, slayer of countless enemies, the Chosen One himself, felt something he rarely experienced: complete tactical irrelevance. Q said simply, "I'm a question your galaxy has never been forced to ask. What happens when the Force isn't the final authority?
He gestured at the frozen battlefield. These clones, bred to die. These droids, built to kill. And you two wielding the Force like it's the answer to everything. But none of you have ever stopped to wonder, what if it isn't? Ahsoka stepped forward, her young voice steady despite her confusion. The Force is everything. It binds the galaxy together, connects all living things. Q laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. Oh, youngling, that's adorable. The Force binds your galaxy together. Your galaxy, in your particular dimension, governed by your specific metaphysical laws. But the universe, the real, infinite, endless universe, doesn't operate on living forces and balance any more than it operates on poetry and hope. He waved his hand. Anakin's lightsaber flew from his grip, disassembled itself in midair, each component floating separately, then reassembled backwards, hilt where blade should be, focusing crystal mounted externally. It hung there, impossible and wrong. Your technology works because of physics. Your Force works because of local cosmic topology. But the lightsaber vanished entirely, erased from existence. I work because I choose to exist. There's a difference. Before Anakin could respond, before he could rage, attack, or demand answers, Q vanished, and time snapped back into full motion like a breaking cable. The battle resumed instantly. Droids fell, clones fired, explosions rippled across the crystalline cityscape. But Anakin and Ahsoka stood frozen for 3 full seconds before muscle memory forced them back into combat. They fought on autopilot, lightsabers deflecting bolts, bodies moving through familiar kata, but their minds were elsewhere. Every Jedi was trained to trust the Force, to surrender to its guidance, to believe in its ultimate wisdom. But Q had just demonstrated something that shattered that training. The Force had limitations, it had boundaries, and beyond those boundaries, beings like Q existed, operating on rules that made the Jedi's most fundamental beliefs look like children's philosophy. The battle ended with Republic victory, as it was always supposed to. But this time, victory tasted like ashes. That night, across secure holochannels, the Jedi Council convened in emergency session. Masters from across the galaxy joined via flickering blue projections. Plo Koon from the Outer Rim sieges, Ki Adi Mundi from Mygeeto, even Quinlan Voss from deep cover in separatist space. They all reported the same thing: disturbances without signature, pauses in reality that the Force couldn't predict, and always the presence of Q, asking questions that cut deeper than any lightsaber. He appeared in the Senate, Shakti reported, her holographic form crackling with interference. Froze Chancellor Palpatine mid-speech, asked the senators why they call it democracy when fear drives every vote. Obi-Wan's expression darkened. He's not attacking, he's teaching. And the lesson is that everything we've built, our order, our philosophies, our certainties, rests on a foundation that isn't as solid as we believed. Yoda closed his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. Test us, he does, but the test may be one we cannot pass. The first rewrite happened on Ryloth. The Republic assault had failed spectacularly. 3 battalions lost, orbital blockade shattered, clone casualties approaching 70%. Master Ima Gun D stood surrounded by droid forces, his last dozen troopers forming a desperate circle, buying time for Twi'lek refugees to escape into the mountains. This was supposed to be a heroic sacrifice, the kind of last stand that would be remembered in Republic history. Then Q appeared, sitting cross-legged atop a deactivated AAT tank, chin resting on his palm like a bored student. I wonder,
he said to no one in particular. What happens if we just rewind? He snapped his fingers. Time flowed backward. Blaster bolts returned to their weapons. Destroyed droids reassembled. Dead clones stood up, wounds sealing, life returning. Within seconds, the entire battle reset to its starting position 3 hours earlier. Then Q changed one variable. He gave the Republic forces perfect tactical knowledge of every droid position. The battle played out again. This time, a flawless Republic victory. Master D stood in the aftermath, surrounded by living troopers who should have been corpses, staring at droid wreckage that had killed them in a timeline that no longer existed. Q materialized beside him, examining the Jedi's expression with scientific interest. Tell me, Master D, do you feel accomplished?
You won.
Your men survived. The mission succeeded. The Jedi's hand trembled on his lightsaber hilt. But it wasn't real. You manipulated. I gave you perfect intelligence. Q interrupted. Something Jedi claim to have through the Force. If you'd been powerful enough, wise enough, connected enough, you would have sensed those ambush positions anyway. All I did was remove the incompetence from your victory. He leaned closer. So answer the question, does it count? Or does winning only matter when it's sufficiently difficult? Master D had no response. Around him, clone troopers celebrated their survival, unaware they'd died and been unmade. The Jedi could only wonder if Q could rewrite defeat into victory. What did that mean for prophecy, for destiny, for the entire concept of the Force's will? The experiments escalated. On Kamino, Q appeared in the cloning facilities, walking among rows of gestation tanks containing thousands of developing clones. The Kaminoan scientists watched helplessly as he examined their work like a disappointed teacher grading a mediocre project. You've industrialized personhood, observed, tapping on transparent steel that separated him from a sleeping clone fetus. Bred them to be obedient, courageous, expendable. You've created the perfect soldiers by removing everything that makes soldiers question whether war is worth fighting. He turned to the chief scientist, Lama Su. Here's an experiment. What if they could choose? With a gesture, every clone in the facility, from newborn to fully trained, suddenly experienced something they'd never had. Absolute free will, unbound by genetic programming. For the first time, orders felt optional. Loyalty felt questionable. The Republic's entire military structure trembled on the edge of collapse, held together only by habit, and the terrible question, if we weren't made to fight, would we choose this? The Jedi felt it immediately, a disturbance that rippled through the Force like a scream. Thousands of clones across the galaxy, suddenly broadcasting confusion, fear, existential crisis. You could sense them through the Force now, truly sense them, not as identical copies, but as individuals, each one grappling with the horrifying revelation that their entire existence had been predetermined. On Coruscant, Shakti rushed to the clone training facility, finding Captain Rex and Commander Cody surrounded by troopers in various states of breakdown. We were made, one clone was saying, his voice hollow. Our courage isn't real. Our loyalty isn't real. We're just programming. Rex, ever the professional, tried to maintain order, but even his voice carried a new weight. We fight because it's right, not because we were designed to. But was that true? Q had asked the question, and now nobody, not the clones, not the Jedi, not even the Republic, could answer it with certainty. Q's next appearance shattered even more foundations. In the depths of the Jedi Temple, in meditation chambers, where Padawans learn to open themselves to the Force. He manifested before a class of younglings. Master Yoda arrived too late, sensing the intrusion, but unable to prevent it. The ancient Jedi found Q sitting among 8-year-old initiates, all of them staring at him with wide eyes. The Force, Q was explaining, in a patient teacher's voice, is what your masters tell you connects everything. But let me ask you something. If the Force creates destiny, do you really have choices? Or are you just very convincing puppets?
One youngling.
A Twi'lek girl named Viola raised her hand. But we feel the Force. We know it's real. Q smiled. Oh, it's absolutely real. But real doesn't mean ultimate. Your home world is real. Does that make it the only planet? The Force is a river, child. A beautiful, powerful river. But I've seen oceans. He stood, never stop questioning. Even especially, the things your teachers say are absolute truth. Before Yoda could intervene, Q turned his attention to something far more dangerous. A Sith Lord, Darth Sidious, concealed in plain sight, as Chancellor Palpatine, felt Q's presence in his private meditation chamber like ice water in his veins. The Sith Lord had survived for decades by being imperceptible, by cloaking himself in layers of deception so deep that even Yoda couldn't sense the darkness beneath. But Q saw everything. My, Q said, materializing in the locked room. A wolf in the Senate chamber. How deliciously theatrical. Sidious ignited his lightsaber in a fluid motion, red blade casting crimson shadows. You dare, I dare nothing. Q interrupted, utterly unbothered by the weapon. I simply observe. You've spent decades manipulating galactic politics, corrupting the Chosen One, orchestrating a clone army, all to destroy the Jedi Order. Very impressive, very complex. But tell me, Sheev, what happens if I just tell them? He gestured toward the door, beyond which the entire Jedi Council sat in session. Sidious felt something he rarely experienced, genuine fear, not of death. He transcended that fear long ago, but of irrelevance. This being could destroy decades of planning with a single sentence. You won't, Sidious said, forcing confidence into his voice. You're testing them, not saving them. If you reveal me, there's no test. Q's smile confirmed the Sith's calculation. Very perceptive. You see, I'm not here to fix your galaxy's problems. I'm here to see if you can fix them yourselves, or if you even want to. He circled Sidious like a predator, or perhaps like something far more alien. Something for which predator and prey were equally meaningless categories. But here's what troubles me about you, Sheev. You think you're embracing freedom by rejecting the Jedi's dogma, but you're just as bound by your hatred as they are by their detachment. You're not evil. You're not even particularly creative. You're just predictable. The word landed like a physical blow. Sidious had built his entire identity on being unknowable, 3 steps ahead, the ultimate manipulator, and Q dismissed it all as predictable. Q vanished, leaving the Sith Lord alone with his fury and a terrible new uncertainty. If Q could see through all his plans, could expose him at any moment, what did that mean for the grand design? For the first time in decades, Darth Sidious felt his grip on destiny loosening, not because of Jedi opposition, not because of political rivals, but because a being existed who looked at the entire Jedi-Sith conflict, the 1,000-year war, the elaborate philosophies, the force-fueled struggle for galactic control, and saw it as quaint. That night, across the galaxy, in Jedi temples and Sith chambers, and clone barracks and civilian homes. Beings of every species lay awake with the same realization. If Q could rewrite battles, grant free will, and dismiss Dark Lords as predictable, then perhaps the Force wasn't the supreme cosmic authority they believed in. Perhaps it was just one system among infinite others, and perhaps most terrifying of all, they built their entire civilization on a foundation that was never as solid as they'd thought. You are CT 7567. You know this because it's etched into your armor, encoded in your genetic sequence, repeated in every roll call since your deployment. Your brothers call you Rex. Your Jedi General trusts you. You've survived 43 battles, lost hundreds of brothers, and never once questioned whether any of it mattered. Until today, you're on Umbara, that perpetual twilight hellscape where the shadows eat light, and every step forward costs lives. Your battalion is pinned down by Umbaran militia, using advanced technology that cuts through clone armor like paper. You see Hardcase take a plasma bolt to the chest. You watch him fall. You feel nothing. There's no time for grief in combat. Then the world stutters, not like an explosion, not like a flashbang, like reality itself glitching. Suddenly, Hardcase is standing again, alive, the fatal wound erased. You're back in position from 30 seconds ago, and Q is standing in the middle of the battlefield, untouched by the firestorm of energy weapons, looking at you with curiosity that makes your skin crawl. Interesting, Q says, his voice somehow cutting through the chaos of battle without raising in volume. You saw it that time. Most beings don't notice when I rewind, but you did. He gestures, and time freezes again. Everyone but you and him locked in temporal suspension. You can see Five's mid-leap, Jesse taking aim, enemy soldiers caught in death animations that won't complete. Tell me, Connecticut, 7567. How many times should I let your friend die before his death becomes real? Before you can answer, time rewinds again. The battle replays. Hardcase dies. Rewind. Hardcase dies differently. Headshot instead of chest wound. Rewind. He survives this time, but Fives takes the hit. Rewind. Everyone survives. Rewind. Everyone dies. Rewind. The battle never happened. You're back on the transport ship, descending toward Umbara for the first time, except you remember all of it. Every death, every timeline, every version of events that Q tested like variables in an experiment. Your hands shake inside your gauntlets. You've been trained to handle fear, to process trauma, to keep fighting no matter what. But you weren't trained for this. Why? You finally managed to ask. Your voice rooked. Q tilts his head, studying you like a specimen. Why rewind? Why show you? Because I'm curious what happens when a soldier realizes that death isn't permanent, that victory isn't earned, that every outcome is just one possibility among infinite permutations. You clones are fascinating, bred to accept fate without question. But what happens when fate becomes obviously arbitrary? He snaps his fingers, and suddenly you're experiencing all the timelines simultaneously. You're dying, and living, and never existing, and having survived the war, and having never been deployed, and still aging in your gestation tank on Camino. Your mind fractures under the weight of contradictory realities, all of them equally real, none of them mattering more than any other. Then, mercifully, it ends. You're back in the present, singular timeline. The battle's still frozen around you. You're wondering if any of it matters. Q continues, answering the question you haven't asked. If I can rewrite outcomes, if death is negotiable, if victory and defeat are just narrative choices, then what's the point of fighting? What's the point of courage, sacrifice, brotherhood, all those values your trainers programmed into you? He leans closer. Here's the terrible truth. Soldier, those values matter because you choose to believe they matter, not because the Force ordained it, not because destiny demands it, but because in a meaningless universe, beings create meaning through their choices. He straightens. The question is, can you still choose to fight when you know it's all arbitrary? Or does knowledge destroy the foundation of heroism? Time resumes. The battle continues. You fight on autopilot, but something inside you has broken. Every trigger pull feels hollow. Every order followed feels like participating in a cosmic joke. Your brothers are dying around you, and you can't stop thinking this timeline is just one draft among infinite revisions. The galaxy-wide effects of Q's presence spread like a virus through hyperspace lanes. On Naboo, he appeared in the Lake Country, where Padme Amidala was consulting with local governors about refugee resettlement. The senator found him sitting in her garden, feeding the sharks as if he'd always been there. "Senator," he greeted her warmly. "I've been reviewing your career. You became queen at 14, fought occupation at 15, became a senator at 16. Very impressive. But tell me, did you ever wonder if your success was real, or if the Force just needed you in position for Anakin Skywalker's story?" Padme's security detail rushed to intervene, but Q froze them mid-step. "I'm not here to harm her," he called over his shoulder. "I'm here to ask uncomfortable questions." He turned back to Padme. "You believe in democracy, in the inherent worth of every voice, but your galaxy operates on prophecy. The chosen one will bring balance. Destiny dictates outcomes. Where's the democracy in that? Where's the choice when cosmic forces predetermined everything?" Padme had faced trade blockades, assassination attempts, and political betrayals without flinching. But Q's questions cut deeper than any threat. "People still make choices," she said firmly. "Prophecy or not, we decide how we respond to circumstances." Q smiled. "Do you? Let's test that." He waved his hand, and suddenly Padme could see alternate timelines. Versions where she'd made different choices. A timeline where she refused to sign the Military Creation Act, and the Republic fell to separatists within a year. A timeline where she married Anakin publicly, and his expulsion from the Jedi Order prevented him from stopping dozens of Sith schemes. A timeline where she died on Geonosis, and Anakin's grief triggered his fall to the dark side 5 years early. Every choice she'd made, every moral stand, every political gambit, Q showed her the consequences of doing differently, and in every alternate timeline, disaster followed. "You see," Q said softly, "your choices only work because they align with predetermined outcomes. Step outside destiny's rails, and civilizations crumble. That's not democracy, Senator. That's a script." On a separatist world, Q appeared before a family of civilians. A Twi'lek father, his human wife, their 2 hybrid children hiding from Republic orbital bombardment. The father, Tamu, clutched a broken comlink, desperately trying to reach evacuation transports while his children sobbed in terror. Q materialized in their basement shelter, and Tamu raised a rusty blaster with shaking hands. "Stay back," he shouted. Q ignored the weapon. "You're on the wrong side of history," he observed. "The Republic calls you separatist sympathizers. The Confederacy uses you as shields. Neither side cares if you live or die. You're just collateral damage in someone else's war. He knelt to the children's level. What if I gave you a choice? I could make you force sensitive right now, powerful enough to protect yourselves, to stop the bombs, to matter in a galaxy that treats you like insects. The father's eyes widened. You can do that. Q nodded. Midichlorians are just microscopic organisms. Adding them to your blood is trivial for me. So, do you want the power to shape your own fate? Tamu looked at his terrified children, at his wife, at the cracked ceiling that might collapse at any moment. The temptation was overwhelming, but something in Q's eyes, that detached curiosity, that experimental observation made him hesitate. Why? Tamu asked. Why offer this to us? Q stood, genuine respect flickering across his face. Because I want to know if beings granted power they didn't earn can use it wisely. The Jedi are born with force sensitivity and build entire philosophies around it. The Sith steal power through corruption. But what about ordinary people, thrust into extraordinary circumstances through random chance? Do they become heroes, tyrants, or just more casualties? The ceiling shook as another bombardment hit nearby. Tamu made his choice. No, he said quietly. If the only way my children survive is by becoming weapons in this war, then the galaxy deserves to burn. Q's smile was unreadable. Approval, disappointment, simple data collection. He vanished without granting or denying the power, leaving the family to their fate. Above them, the bombardment continued. Whether they survived would be determined by chance, not destiny. And perhaps that was Q's point all along.
Captain Rex didn't report the incident. What would he say? Sir, a reality warping entity showed me infinite timelines where my brothers die in different ways, and now I can't shake the feeling that nothing matters. The Jedi already had enough problems without their most reliable clone officer admitting to metaphysical crisis. So Rex did what he'd been trained to do. He buried it deep, maintained discipline, and kept his voice steady when giving orders. But his brothers noticed. Five saw how Rex hesitated before tactical decisions. Now, as if weighing them against invisible alternatives, Jesse noticed the way Rex stared at fallen troopers, his expression haunted by memories of deaths that hadn't happened in this timeline. And Ahsoka, sensitive to emotions through the Force, felt the void where Rex's certainty used to be. You saw him too, didn't you? She asked quietly after a mission briefing. Rex's jaw tightened. Commander, I don't. It's okay, Ahsoka interrupted. We all saw something. The Jedi Council is trying to classify Q. But how do you classify something the Force can't touch? The Jedi Council's emergency measures grew increasingly desperate. Master Mace Windu proposed assembling a task force of the Order's most powerful members to confront Q directly. Master Ki Adi Mundi suggested consulting ancient texts from Tython, searching for pre-Republic records of similar entities. Master Plo Koon advocated for a defensive approach, strengthening the temple's barriers, though everyone knew those barriers were designed to repel Force-based threats. None of their suggestions addressed the real problem. Q wasn't attacking them. He was educating them, and the education was destroying their foundations more effectively than any Sith assault. Obi-Wan voiced what many were thinking. What if we're approaching this wrong? What if Q isn't the crisis? What if he's revealing a crisis that always existed? The silence that followed was damning. Because if Obi-Wan was right, then the Jedi Order had spent millennia building a philosophy on incomplete information, and you couldn't fight your way out of that with lightsabers. Yoda called for a deep meditation session. All available council members synchronized through the Force, reaching outward to comprehend Q's nature. They sat in a circle in the council chamber's center, minds joining in that uniquely Jedi communion, where individual consciousness dissolved into collective awareness. They reached through the Force, extending their perception across the galaxy, touching the countless lives connected by the living Force's web. They found war. They found suffering. They found the usual dark side corruption eating at the Republic's edges. But when they searched for Q, they found nothing. Not a void, not a blank space, just irrelevance. The Force didn't register him any more than mathematics registers poetry. He existed in a category their metaphysical framework simply couldn't process. The meditation ended with 12 Jedi Masters opening their eyes simultaneously, each wearing the same expression. Defeat. He is not our enemy, Yoda said finally. Teach us. He tries. But the lesson may be one we cannot survive learning. Then Q appeared in their midst, uninvited and unexpected, sitting cross-legged in the air above their meditation circle. Don't get up, he said cheerfully. I know Force meditation takes a lot out of you. All that searching for cosmic connection and universal balance. He rotated lazily, examining each council member. I've been watching your order for several weeks now. You're impressive, truly. 25,000 years of accumulated wisdom, refined combat techniques, philosophical frameworks that have guided trillions of beings. But you've made one catastrophic error. Mace Windu's hand moved toward his lightsaber. Q didn't even glance in his direction. You've confused local phenomenon with universal truth. The Force is powerful. Here, in this galaxy, in this dimension, within the specific physical and metaphysical laws that govern your reality. But beyond those boundaries, he gestured vaguely upward. The Force is just one river among countless oceans, and you've built your entire civilization on the assumption that your river is everything. Before anyone could respond, Q transported the entire council, not through the Force, not through hyperspace, through simple narrative necessity, the kind of movement that bypassed physics entirely. One moment, they were in the temple on Coruscant. The next, they stood on Mortis, that impossible realm where the Force crystallized into physical form, where the ones dwelled as living embodiments of light. Except Mortis looked different. The geometric impossible architecture remained. The eternal sunset still painted the sky, but now there was a tear in reality above them. A wound in space through which they could see something else. Other universes, other laws, infinite variations where the Force didn't exist, where completely different systems governed existence. The Father, that ancient being who maintained balance between his children, stood before them. And even he looked diminished in Q's presence. You brought them here, the Father said, his voice heavy with resignation. Why? Q gestured at the assembled Jedi. They need perspective. Tell them what you've known for eons but never shared. The Father's ancient eyes met Yoda's, and in that gaze was an apology that transcended words. The Force, the Father said slowly, is not infinite. It is vast beyond mortal comprehension. Yes, it binds this galaxy, extends into regions you've never explored, reaches across dimensions you cannot perceive, but it is not universal. He gestured at the tier in reality Q had created. Beyond our galaxy, beyond our dimensional framework, exist realms where the Force does not function, where different laws govern existence, where beings like Q operate according to principles we cannot comprehend. Obi-Wan stepped forward, his voice tight, but the prophecies,
The Chosen One, the balance, are real. The Father confirmed. Within the Force's domain, Anakin Skywalker will bring balance to this system. But if he traveled beyond the Force's reach, into the wider cosmos, he would be just a man with impressive reflexes and a laser sword. No prophecy, no destiny, just choices. The revelation hit like a physical blow. The Jedi Order had built everything on the assumption that the Force was universal, that its will was absolute, that light and dark were cosmic fundamentals, and in one sentence, the Father had revealed it all as provincial thinking. Q walked between the stunned Jedi, his voice almost gentle now. You're not fools, you're not even wrong. Exactly, the Force is the most powerful phenomenon in your galaxy. Your philosophies are sophisticated, your dedication admirable, your impact on trillions of lives undeniably positive. But you've never had to confront your own limitations, because you've never encountered something truly outside your paradigm. He stopped in front of Yoda, kneeling to meet the ancient master's eyes. For 900 years, you've mastered the Force. You've seen empires rise and fall. You've guided the Order through darkness and light. But you've never had to ask the question, what if everything we know is just one perspective? What if balance isn't a cosmic imperative, but a local preference? What if the very foundation of our beliefs is arbitrary? Yoda's ears drooped. Know this I did not. Sense it perhaps, but confront it. The ancient Jedi's voice trailed off. Q stood. That's the test, Grand Master. Can you maintain your values, your compassion, your commitment to peace, when you know those values aren't cosmically ordained? Can you choose to be a Jedi, when being a Jedi is just one option among infinite others? The Council stood in silence on Mortis, staring through that tear in reality at the infinite beyond. Some saw liberation, freedom from the weight of destiny, the possibility of genuine choice. Others saw existential horror, the meaninglessness of their entire tradition, the arbitrariness of everything they'd sacrificed for. And a few, like Yoda and Obi-Wan, saw something more complex. The terrible responsibility of creating meaning in a universe that didn't provide it automatically. Q prepared to return them to Coruscant, but paused. One more thing. Your chosen one, Anakin Skywalker. The prophecy says he'll bring balance to the Force, but prophecies are just probable futures, not certainties. And balance, he smiled cryptically. Balance might not mean what you think it means, especially when the one meant to achieve it realizes he's been a pawn in a cosmic game. The Council returned to Coruscant, but the Jedi who came back were not the same ones who left. They carried knowledge that would haunt them. The Force was powerful but not infinite. Destiny was real but not absolute. And somewhere in the galaxy, Q continued his experiments, pushing toward a final test that would determine whether this civilization could survive the truth. Darth Sidious prided himself on being 3 steps ahead of every opponent, every ally, every variable in the galaxy. He'd manipulated the Republic's collapse for decades, orchestrated a galaxy-spanning war, corrupted the Chosen One's master, and concealed himself from the entire Jedi Order while sitting in their Senate chambers. But Q represented something his Sith training hadn't prepared him for: an opponent who couldn't be manipulated, because manipulation required the target to care about outcomes, and Q seemed to care about nothing except observation. Still, Sidious was nothing if not adaptable. If Q couldn't be controlled, perhaps he could be directed. The Sith Lord reached out through secure channels to Count Dooku, his public face in the separatist movement. Our mutual problem, Sidious's hologram said. distorted for security, presence and opportunity. If Q destabilizes the Jedi Order's faith in the Force, we merely need to position ourselves as the alternative. Pragmatism over mysticism, power over prophecy. Dooku's aristocratic features tightened. Master, I'm not certain we understand what Q truly is. Count Dooku had his own history with Q's interventions. The entity had appeared during a critical separatist strategy session on Sereno, materializing in Dooku's ancestral palace, while the Count reviewed invasion plans for the Outer Rim. Fascinating, Q had said, examining the holographic battle displays. You were a Jedi Master, taught by Yoda himself, trained in diplomacy and peace. Now you command armies of droids, orchestrate planetary bombardments, all in service of what exactly? Political reform through mass murder. Dooku had ignited his crimson lightsaber, the curved hilt elegant in his practiced grip. I serve freedom from Jedi hypocrisy and Republic corruption. Q laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine
amusement. No, you serve your own disillusionment. You saw the Jedi's flaws and assumed the opposite philosophy must be correct. But Sith doctrine is just Jedi doctrine inverted. Same obsession with the Force, same belief in destiny, same certainty that your path is cosmically justified. You're not free, Dooku. You're just wearing different chains. The words had gnawed at Dooku for days. He'd left the Jedi Order because of their hypocrisy, their willingness to serve a corrupt republic, their attachment to failing ideals. The Sith path had promised liberation, through power, freedom through passion, strength through breaking chains. But Q's observation cut deeper. What if both Jedi and Sith were equally trapped in the same narrow framework? What if the Force itself was the cage? Dooku meditated on this in his private chambers, reaching through the dark side for answers, finding only more questions. His frustration grew until Q appeared again, uninvited, sitting in the meditation chamber's shadows, still searching for meaning in the Force. Q asked quietly, "Let me show you something." Before Dooku could react, Q transported him, not through space, but through conceptual reality, to a place beyond the galaxy's edge, where the Force's presence faded like light from a distant star. Dooku gasped, feeling his connection to the dark side weakening, not because it was blocked, but because it simply stopped existing past a certain boundary. The Force ends, Q explained, standing beside him in the void. Not everywhere, just in your galaxy, your dimensional cluster. Beyond this point, different rules apply, different powers, different systems entirely. Dooku stared into the cosmic darkness, feeling more vulnerable than he had since childhood. Without the Force, he was just an old man with a sword, his enhanced reflexes gone, his ability to dominate minds erased, his connection to the grand Sith tradition revealed as geographically limited. "Why show me this?" he asked, voice barely controlled. Q's response was almost kind. "Because you deserve to know that your grand rebellion against Jedi doctrine, your embrace of passion over peace, power over serenity, is just trading one local philosophy for another. The Jedi say the Force flows through all living things. The Sith say the Force bends to the strong. But neither of you ever asked, what if the Force is just one phenomenon among countless others? What if your entire light versus dark struggle is irrelevant to 99% of reality?" Dooku felt something crack inside him, not his power, but his certainty. The dark side had given him purpose after the Jedi's hypocrisy destroyed his faith. But if the dark side was just another provincial belief system, what did that make him? A deluded old man playing at cosmic significance, while the universe laughed. Meanwhile, Darth Sidious attempted to weaponize Q's presence more directly. He orchestrated a scenario designed to bring Q face to face with Anakin Skywalker under controlled circumstances. The plan was elegant. If Q questioned the Chosen One's destiny during the moment of vulnerability, Sidious could be there to offer certainty, to position the Sith path as freedom from cosmic manipulation. He arranged for Anakin to be alone in the Jedi Temple's lower levels, ostensibly on a security inspection, when Q appeared. But Q saw through the manipulation instantly. "Sheev's watching, you know," Q said to Anakin, gesturing vaguely toward the hidden surveillance devices. "He thinks he's using me to corrupt you." It's adorable how Sith Lords always think they're the smartest beings in the room. Anakin's hand moved to his lightsaber. "I don't know what you are, but you'll defend yourself with a weapon that uses synthetic crystals to generate plasma contained by magnetic fields," Q finished. "Very impressive technology, completely useless against me, but the gesture is noted." Q walked around Anakin, examining him like a medical specimen. The Chosen One, born of the Force itself, or so the story goes, destined to bring balance, the central figure in prophecies that predate your civilization. "Tell me, Anakin, do you ever resent it?" The question caught Anakin off guard. Resent being the Chosen One. Resent having your entire life predetermined. Q clarified. "Your mother was a slave. You were a slave. Then the Jedi freed you, except they didn't really. They just transferred your ownership to destiny. Every choice you make, every relationship you form, every battle you fight, it's all in service of this prophecy you never agreed to. Where's the freedom in that?" Anakin's jaw clenched. The words resonated with fears he barely admitted to himself. "I choose to be a Jedi. I choose to fight for the Republic." Q's expression softened slightly. "Do you? Or do you just tell yourself that, because the alternative, acknowledging that you're a puppet of cosmic forces, is too terrifying to accept?" He snapped his fingers, and suddenly Anakin could see it. Alternate timelines, where different choices led to radically different outcomes. Versions where he refused Jedi training and became a pilot, an engineer, a politician. Versions where he fell to the dark side immediately. Versions where he died young, and in every timeline, some version of balance occurred with or without him. The prophecy didn't need Anakin Skywalker specifically. It just needed someone to fulfill a role. The revelation devastated Anakin more than any wound. His identity was built on being the Chosen One.
Being special, being necessary to the galaxy's fate.
But Q had just shown him that he was replaceable, that the Force would achieve its goals regardless of his participation.
Why?
Anakin asked, his voice raw. "Why tell me this?" Q's answer was surprisingly gentle, because beings deserve to know they have choices, even when cosmic forces try to convince them otherwise. Yes, there's a prophecy about you. Yes, the Force has a role for you to play, but you can refuse. You can walk away. The galaxy might burn, the Jedi might fall, terrible things might happen, but they'd be your choices, not destiny's script. He vanished, leaving Anakin alone with existential crisis, and unknown to both of them. A Sith Lord whose plan had catastrophically backfired, because Sidious had wanted Q to make Anakin question the Jedi's authority. Instead, Q had taught Anakin to question all authority, including the Sith's. In his meditation chamber, Sidious felt the disturbance and realized his error. Q wasn't a tool. Q was a teacher, and the lesson he taught destroyed certainty itself, the very foundation both Jedi and Sith required to function. Across the galaxy, both orders reeled from Q's philosophical assault. Jedi questioned whether their sacrifices had meaning beyond local tradition.
Sith wondered if their pursuit of power was just another form of surrender to predetermined patterns. And in the spaces between, ordinary beings watched their supposed masters, both light and dark, revealed as equally limited, equally confused, equally trapped in frameworks they'd never thought to question. The Clone Wars continued, but both sides now fought with a new undertone of uncertainty. When Jedi and Sith clashed, they couldn't escape the knowledge their entire conflict might be irrelevant. Their powers might be local, their philosophies might be arbitrary, and somewhere in the infinite cosmos beyond their galaxy, beings existed who looked at their eternal struggle between light and dark, the way adults view children, arguing over playground rules. The humiliation was total, not because Q had defeated them in combat, he'd barely acknowledged them as threats, but because he'd shown them their own irrelevance. And for beings who'd built their identities on cosmic significance, irrelevance was a fate worse than death. The first Jedi to leave the Order was a young knight named Talisibeth Enwanding Esterhazy, scout to those who knew her. She'd always struggled with Force sensitivity, working twice as hard as her peers to achieve half their results, compensating with determination and intelligence. But Q's revelations broke something in her. If the Force wasn't universal, if Jedi teachings were just local customs, then what did it mean that she'd sacrificed her entire childhood to master something arbitrary? She walked into the council chamber during a routine session and simply placed her lightsaber on the floor. "I'm done," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life trying to be good enough for the Force. But if the Force is just one phenomenon among infinite others, then maybe good enough was never the right question." Mace Windu tried to reason with her. Yoda offered understanding, but Scout just smiled sadly and left. Within a week, 12 more Jedi followed, not to the dark side, not to join the Sith, just away, choosing uncertainty over comfortable doctrine. The Order had survived betrayals, wars, and purges, but voluntary exodus from beings who simply stopped believing, that was new, that was terrifying. The clone desertion crisis hit harder because it was less philosophical and more practical. After Q granted them awareness of their programming, thousands of clones across the galaxy began asking questions their training had never prepared them to answer. On Kamino, newly graduated battalions refused deployment orders. On battlefronts, entire units requested rotation back to Coruscant for psychological evaluation. Jedi speak for existential breakdown, and on the Outer Rim, a group of 200 clones simply vanished into civilian life, removing their armor, abandoning their designations, choosing names for themselves instead of numbers. The Republic couldn't afford to lose military assets during wartime, but what could they do? Court-martial soldiers for becoming self-aware. The Senate debated frantically, while military leadership scrambled for solutions. Admiral Tarkin proposed reconditioning, essentially memory wipes to restore obedience. The suggestion made even hardened senators uncomfortable. You could recondition a droid, but recondition a sentient being who had gained consciousness. That was slavery, and everyone knew it. The Republic's moral foundation cracked a little wider. You're standing in a crowd on Coruscant's lower levels, watching a public broadcast on a massive holo display. Chancellor Palpatine is giving a speech about unity and perseverance through these troubling times of uncertainty. His voice is measured, reassuring, projecting exactly the paternal authority the Republic needs. But you've been paying attention. You noticed how he never directly addresses Q's existence, never acknowledges what everyone now knows, that the Force isn't absolute, that destiny might be negotiable, that the foundations everyone trusted are built on sand. Around you, other civilians watch with expressions ranging from hope to despair. A Twi'lek mother clutches her child tighter. A human veteran, missing arm from the wars, laughs bitterly at Palpatine's promises of guided fate. And beside you, an elderly Ithorian whispers what everyone's thinking. If the gods aren't real, what happens to us? You don't have an answer. Nobody does. That's the problem Q created. Not destruction, but uncertainty. And uncertainty is harder to fight than any army. The philosophical crisis spread beyond Force-sensitive beings into civilian populations who'd built their understanding of reality around Jedi mythology. For 25,000 years, the Jedi had been proof that the universe had structure, that good and evil were real categories, that cosmic justice existed. But if the Jedi themselves admitted their powers were limited, if their wisdom was incomplete, then what separated them from anyone else? With advanced training, on Coruscant, a grassroots movement emerged. The unguided. They weren't anti-Jedi. They were post-Jedi. They argued that if destiny was arbitrary, if the Force was just one localized phenomenon, then beings needed to create their own meaning without relying on cosmic authorities. Their manifestos spread through underground networks. We are not pawns. We are not destined. We are not part of anyone's prophecy. We are simply alive, and that's enough. The movement gained millions of followers within weeks. The Republic government tried to suppress it as destabilizing during wartime. But you can't arrest an idea, especially when that idea is freedom from metaphysical certainty. Q appeared at one of the Unguided's rallies, not to endorse them, but to ask questions. He materialized on stage beside their leader, a former Jedi Padawan named Jax Pavan, who'd left the Order after Q's interventions. You've built a philosophy on rejecting destiny, Q observed, addressing the crowd of thousands. Admirable. But let me pose a question. If I removed your ability to make choices right now, if I programmed your next 10 years of decisions into your brain, perfect and unchangeable, would you notice? Or would you continue thinking you had free will because you didn't feel constrained? The crowd murmured uneasily. Jax Pavan stepped forward. That's a hypothetical. You're asking us to prove we have something that by definition can't be proven externally. Q smiled. Exactly. Free will might be an illusion you've convinced yourselves is real. The Jedi claim the Force guides them. You claim you guide yourselves, but neither can prove it. So tell me, is the unguided movement about freedom, or just about a different flavor of comfortable delusion? The question hung in the air like a weapon, because Q was right. There was no way to prove free will existed. You could feel like you were making choices, but that feeling could be predetermined. The Jedi believed the Force guided them to right action. The unguided believed they chose their actions independently, but both beliefs rested on unprovable assumptions. Jax Pavan, to his credit, didn't retreat into certainty. Maybe we can't prove it, he admitted. Maybe free will is a useful fiction we tell ourselves to justify taking responsibility for our actions. But here's what I know. Living as if choices matter, whether they're real or not, produces better outcomes than surrendering to prophecy or despair. Q's expression shifted to something like respect. Now that, he said quietly, is wisdom, not certainty, not cosmic guarantees, just practical philosophy in the face of unknowable truth. He vanished, leaving the rally in thoughtful silence. The unguided movement continued, but now with a more mature understanding. They weren't rejecting mysticism for absolute truth. They were choosing one uncertainty over another. Q's were choosing one uncertainty over another, and perhaps that choice itself was the point. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the war ground on with increasingly hollow justifications. Clone battalions fought separatist droids, while both sides questioned whether their programming, genetic or digital, left room for genuine choice. Jedi led troops while struggling with the knowledge that their Force-guided tactics might be no more cosmically validated than flipping a coin. And behind it all, in shadows few perceived, Darth Sidious refined his plans with growing desperation. His grand design had always relied on beings believing in destiny, accepting that darkness was necessary for balance, trusting that power followed natural laws. But Q had poisoned that worldview. If destiny was negotiable, if balance was arbitrary, if the Force itself was provincial, then what justified the Sith's existence? Sidious found himself in an unfamiliar position. His entire philosophy rendered potentially meaningless by an entity who didn't even disagree with it, who simply operated beyond its relevance. For a Sith Lord who'd built his identity on being smarter than everyone else, irrelevance was the cruelest fate imaginable. Across the galaxy, billions of beings wrestled with the same fundamental question Q had posed. If free will vanished tomorrow, would anyone notice? The question had no comfortable answer. Jedi who claimed to follow the Force's will couldn't prove they weren't just following their own desires dressed in mystical language. Sith who claimed to impose their will on reality couldn't prove they weren't slaves to hatred and programming. Clones couldn't prove their loyalty was chosen rather than genetic compulsion. Civilians couldn't prove their daily decisions weren't predetermined by circumstance and biology. And yet people kept making choices, kept taking responsibility, kept acting as if their actions mattered, even when cosmic significance was stripped away. Perhaps that was the real test Q had designed. Not whether beings could prove they had free will, but whether they could maintain moral behavior without the comfort of cosmic validation. Could you be good when goodness wasn't ordained? Could you fight for justice when justice wasn't guaranteed to triumph? Could you love when love wasn't written in destiny's script? The galaxy was discovering, slowly and painfully, that the answer might be yes. But the cost of that discovery was every comfortable certainty they'd ever held. Anakin Skywalker stood in the Jedi Temple's meditation chamber at 0300 hours, unable to sleep, haunted by visions that the Force refused to clarify. They weren't the usual prophetic dreams. Those had a texture, a weight, a sense of inevitability. These were different, fragmented, multiple futures overlapping, each one equally real and unreal. In one, he saw himself kneeling before Palpatine, eyes blazing yellow with Sith corruption. In another, he died on some distant battlefield, remembered as a hero. In a third, he walked away from everything, Jedi, Sith, the war itself, and lived quietly on a rim world with Padme and children he'd never meet. The visions weren't warnings or prophecies, they were possibilities, and that terrified him more than any Sith attack, because possibilities meant choice, and choice meant responsibility. Then Q appeared, not with his usual theatrical flair, but quietly, almost respectfully. "You feel it, don't you?" Q said softly. "The weight of knowing that your future isn't written, that the prophecy is just one probable outcome among thousands, that the chosen one is just a title, not a destiny." Anakin's hand moved instinctively to his lightsaber, but he didn't ignite it. "What do you want from me?" Q's expression was unreadable, not cruel, not kind, just infinitely patient. "I want to show you something. The moment where everything changes, the fulcrum point of your entire civilization, the event that will define this galaxy for generations." He extended his hand. "Come with me, Anakin Skywalker. Let me show you the day the Jedi Order dies." Before Anakin could refuse, reality shifted. They stood in the temple, but different, time displaced, frozen, in a moment of horror that hadn't happened yet. but felt inevitable. Clone troopers filled every corridor, weapons raised. Jedi lay dead or dying. Masters, knights, Padawans, younglings. Anakin saw Shakti's body, sprawled in a meditation chamber. Saw clone Captain Rex, standing over a fallen Jedi, with his blaster still smoking, his face a mask of anguish. Saw the temple's great hall burning, its ancient texts turned to ash. And in the center of it all, Anakin saw himself older, scarred, eyes aflame with hatred, leading the assault. Time was frozen, every being suspended in their moment of death or killing. Only Anakin and Q could move. "This is Order 66, Q explained, walking through the carnage like a curator in a museum of atrocities. The moment when every clone trooper in the galaxy receives a single command. The Jedi have betrayed the Republic. Execute them. Genetic programming overrides loyalty, friendship, years of fighting side by side. And the clones obey, because that's what they were designed to do." He gestured at Captain Rex, frozen mid-pull of his trigger. "Look at his face. He doesn't want to do this. But the programming is absolute. Free will, if it ever existed, is suspended." Anakin stared at the frozen tableau, his breath coming in short gasps. This can't be real. The clones would never. They will," Q interrupted, "unless circumstances change dramatically. This is the most probable future, the one the Force has been building toward for decades. Balance, Anakin. This is what balance looks like when achieved through violence and fear." He turned to face the younger version of Anakin, the one leading the slaughter. "And you're the instrument of that balance. The chosen one, fulfilling his destiny by destroying the very order that trained him." Anakin fell to his knees among the frozen corpses, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was seeing. "Why would I do this? I would never."
Wouldn't you?
Q knelt beside him, his voice gentle but relentless. "You're afraid of loss, afraid of not being powerful enough to protect the people you love, afraid that the Jedi's rules will cost you everything. And when someone offers you power, absolute dark side power, to save the one person you care about most, you'll take it. You'll tell yourself it's justified, that the Jedi failed you, that the Republic is corrupt anyway, that the ends justify the means, and you'll be wrong. But by the time you realize it, millions will be dead." Q gestured at the frozen scene. "This is destiny, Anakin. This is the prophecy's fulfillment. The Jedi Order destroyed. The Sith triumphant, at least temporarily. Balance achieved through genocide. Is this the future you want, or will you choose differently?" Anakin's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to choose differently, if this is destiny." Q snapped his fingers, and time resumed for a single moment, just long enough for Anakin to watch himself strike down the Jedi Knight, to hear the screams, to feel the heat of the burning temple. Then Q froze it again. Destiny is a story beings tell themselves to avoid taking responsibility for their choices, Q said firmly. "The Force shows you probable futures based on current trajectories, but trajectories can change. You have free will, Anakin. You've always had."
Prophecy isn't a command, it's a warning. Yeah, it says, if current patterns continue, this boy will bring balance by destroying what's unbalanced. But you can change the patterns. You can refuse to be the instrument of destiny. He stood, pulling Anakin to his feet. "The question I'm asking, the question this entire galaxy must answer, is simple. If destiny vanished tomorrow, if prophecy was revealed as just sophisticated probability calculation, who would you be? Would you still be a hero? Would you still fight for justice? Or are you only good because you think the cosmos demands it?" Anakin stared at his future self, at the monster he could become, at the choice crystallized in this frozen moment. I want to be better than this, Anakin said finally, his voice growing stronger. Not because of prophecy, not because the Force demands it, but because this, he gestured at the slaughter around them, is wrong. Even if destiny says it should happen, even if balance requires it, it's wrong. Q's expression shifted to something approaching approval. Now you're beginning to understand. Morality isn't about obeying cosmic laws. It's about making choices in the face of uncertainty. The Jedi taught you to surrender to the Force's will. The Sith would teach you to impose your will through power. But real wisdom is simpler. Do what's right because it's right, not because someone or something ordained it. He snapped his fingers again, and the horrible vision vanished. They stood back in the meditation chamber, present time, the temple peaceful around them. But Anakin was changed. He'd seen his worst possible future, not as inevitable fate, but as a choice he could refuse. What if I'm not strong enough? Anakin asked. What if I make the wrong choice? Q's answer was brutally honest. Then you fail, and the galaxy suffers. But it would be your failure, your choice, not destiny's script. That's the burden of free will, Anakin. You get to choose, but you also have to live with the consequences. Q began to fade, his work with Anakin complete, but he left one final gift, or curse, depending on perspective. With a gesture, he temporarily lifted the veil between Anakin and all possible futures. For 3 seconds, the Chosen One experienced every decision he might make, every consequence, every branching timeline. Versions where he stayed loyal to the Jedi and watched Padme die. Versions where he fell to the dark side and lived in agonized regret for decades. Versions where he walked away from everything and found peace but left the galaxy to burn. Versions where he found a third path, rejecting both Jedi and Sith dogma, creating something new. The possibilities were infinite, each one real, each one achievable, each one terrifying in its own way. And when the visions ended, when Anakin gasped back into singular consciousness, he understood what Q had been teaching the entire time. There was no safe choice, no guaranteed happy ending, no cosmic authority that would make decisions for him, just an uncertain future and the terrible freedom to shape it. He could still fall, could still become the monster from the vision, but now he knew it was a choice, not a destiny. And that knowledge, painful as it was the first step towards something resembling genuine free will. Across the galaxy, Q repeated similar tests with hundreds of beings, not just Force-sensitive individuals, but ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. A clone trooper, shown the moment he'd receive Order 66, asked whether he'd resist or obey. A senator, shown the moment she'd vote for emergency powers that would end the Republic, asked whether political expediency or principle would guide her. A separatist general, shown the millions of civilian casualties his tactics would cause, asked whether victory justified the cost. Every test had the same core question: when certainty is stripped away, when cosmic validation is removed, when you know that no destiny protects you from consequences, what will you choose? Some passed, most failed, a few surprised even Q. But the test itself was the point, because a galaxy that had operated on prophecy, destiny, and cosmic balance for 25,000 years needed to learn a harder truth. Freedom meant responsibility, choice meant consequences, and being morally good required doing right, because it was right, not because the Force or fate or prophecy demanded it. The Jedi Order would never fully recover from that lesson.
But perhaps that was the balance the galaxy truly needed. The galaxy didn't collapse after Q's interventions. That would have been cleaner, easier to understand. Instead, it fractured slowly, like ice under pressure, cracks spreading through institutions that had stood for millennia. The Jedi Order held an unprecedented assembly on Coruscant. Every available master, knight, and senior Padawan gathered in the temple's Great Hall. The discussion wasn't about tactics or war strategy. It was about whether the Order itself should continue to exist. Master Plo Koon argued for adaptation. We were wrong about the Force's universality, but that doesn't invalidate our principles: compassion, justice, peace. Perhaps we need to rebuild our philosophy without cosmic guarantees. Master Say CT encountered. Our authority came from being the Force's servants. If we're just beings with unusual abilities and a particular philosophy, what separates us from any other organization? Why should the Republic grant us special status? The debate raged for hours. No consensus emerged. For an order built on unity through the Force, division was existential catastrophe. Some Jedi left to become wandering peacekeepers, divorced from institutional authority. Others doubled down on tradition, clinging to familiar doctrine even as its foundations crumbled. A few, the wisest perhaps, sat in uncertainty, accepting that they didn't have answers, and that maybe that was okay. Yoda sat alone in his meditation chamber after the assembly, feeling every one of his 900 years. He'd guided the Order through wars, betrayals, and political upheavals, but he'd never faced this voluntary dissolution, born not from defeat, but from enlightenment. The ancient master reached out through the Force, not seeking answers, but simply feeling its presence. It was still there, vast, beautiful, connecting billions of living beings across the galaxy. Q hadn't destroyed the Force. He'd just revealed its boundaries. Know this, I should have, Yoda whispered to the empty room. Arrogant, we were. Assume universality from local experience. We did. Teach humility. We claimed. Practice humility. We did not. He thought about the younglings in their training halls, learning to feel the Force, believing they were touching cosmic truth. Should they still be taught the old ways? Or should the Order admit its limitations? Teach power without certainty, compassion without cosmic validation. The weight of those questions pressed down on him like gravity. For the first time in centuries, Yoda felt genuinely old, not physically, but philosophically. His wisdom, accumulated over 900 years, suddenly seemed provincial, limited, incomplete. And yet, he continued to meditate, continued to feel the Force. Because even if it wasn't universal, it was still beautiful. Even if it wasn't absolute, it was still worth serving. Perhaps that was the lesson Q wanted them to learn. The clone army faced its own reckoning, with heightened awareness of their programming. Thousands of clones sought what they called decommissioning, not death, but release from military service, the right to choose their own paths. The Republic couldn't afford to grant mass releases during wartime, but refusing felt like slavery. Chancellor Palpatine proposed a compromise. Clones who completed their service term could choose civilian life, with Republic support for reintegration. It was inadequate, too little, too late, but it was something. Captain Rex found himself in an unusual position, mediating between clone rights activists and Republic military command. We were made to fight, he explained to a Senate committee. But being made for a purpose doesn't mean we can't choose a different one. If you don't understand that, then you're treating us as equipment, not beings. The senators shifted uncomfortably because Rex was right, and everyone knew it. The Republic's military strength rested on an enslaved army. Q hadn't created that moral horror. He just forced everyone to look at it directly. Some clones stayed in service voluntarily, finding purpose in protecting civilians and fighting for justice. Others left to become farmers, engineers, pilots, artists, lives they'd never been designed for, but chose anyway. And a few, like Rex, stayed while fighting for systemic change. They were the bridges between worlds, soldiers who'd gained consciousness, but chose to remain warriors, not because of programming, but because they believed the cause was just. That was the difference. Q's intervention created, not the action, but the meaning behind it. You're watching all of this unfold from your apartment in Coruscant's mid-levels. The holonet is filled with debates about Q's nature, the Force's limitations, whether destiny exists. Philosophers argue. Religious leaders scramble to reframe their teachings. Politicians exploit the uncertainty for advantage. But you're just trying to live your life. Work your job at the Transport Authority. Pay rent. Maybe save enough to visit your family on Corellia. Q's revelations didn't change your daily reality much. You never had force powers. Never believed in prophecy. Your life was always about making choices without cosmic guidance. In a way, the galaxy is just catching up to what ordinary beings always knew. You do your best with limited information and hope things work out. But you notice something shifting in the culture around you. People are less certain, but also more responsible. When you can't blame destiny or cosmic forces for outcomes, you have to own your decisions. It's uncomfortable, scary, but maybe more honest. You think about what Q said, that beings create meaning in a meaningless universe through their choices. It's not comforting, but it might be true. And truth, your learning isn't meant to be comfortable. It's just meant to be accurate. Then Q appeared one final time, not to any individual, but to the entire galaxy simultaneously. Every holodisplay, every screen, every communications device broadcast his image. He sat in empty space, the galaxy visible behind him like a backdrop. His expression, neither cruel nor kind, but infinitely patient. I've been here for several weeks, Q began, his voice reaching billions of beings across thousands of worlds, testing you, questioning you, forcing you to confront uncomfortable truths about the foundations of your civilization. You're probably wondering why. He paused, as if genuinely considering his own motivations. The truth is, your galaxy fascinated me. A civilization built entirely on prophecy and destiny, where beings surrender agency to cosmic forces, where balance is achieved through violence, where free will is considered dangerous. It was so fragile, so precarious, one question away from collapse. He gestured at the galaxy behind him. But you didn't collapse. You fractured. Yes.
Struggled, absolutely. Many of you are still struggling, but you didn't surrender to nihilism. You didn't stop trying to be good when goodness lost its cosmic guarantee. That's remarkable. Ka's expression shifted, still unreadable, but perhaps containing a hint of respect. Let me tell you what I've learned about your species, your cultures, your galaxy. You are not special. The Force is not universal. Your prophecies are sophisticated probability calculations, not cosmic certainties. Your Jedi and Sith philosophies are local traditions, no more inherently true than any other belief system. You are one small galaxy among infinite others, operating on rules that don't apply beyond your borders. He leaned forward slightly. But here's what matters, knowing that you still choose to act with compassion. You still fight for justice. You still create meaning through your relationships, your art, your sacrifices. You don't need cosmic validation to be decent beings. You just need to decide that decency matters. He stood, preparing to leave. I'm not going to fix your problems. I'm not going to stop your wars, prevent Order 66, or save you from the consequences of your choices. You don't need a savior. You need humility. You need to understand that your power is real but limited. Your wisdom is valuable but incomplete. Your traditions are beautiful but not absolute. Can you maintain your values without certainty? That's the real test. Cars began to fade, his image dissolving across billions of screens, but his final words echoed through every corner of the galaxy. The Force reached outward, searching for answers about me, and it found nothing. Not because I blocked it, but because I exist in a category the Force doesn't define. That's not a weakness, it's just a boundary. Every system has limits. The question isn't whether you acknowledge those limits. The question is whether you can still be good, still be brave, still be compassionate, when you know your moral framework isn't cosmically ordained, but simply chosen. He vanished completely, and the galaxy was left alone with itself, forever changed. The Force still flowed through billions of living beings. Jedi still trained in meditation chambers, Sith still plotted in shadows, clone troopers still fought battles, civilians still struggled through daily life. But now they did so with a new awareness. They were free, terrifyingly, beautifully free. Free to choose, free to fail, free to create meaning in a universe that didn't provide it automatically. The certainty was gone. The cosmic guarantees were stripped away, but in their place was something more precious, more fragile, more deeply true, genuine choice. And with that choice came responsibility, not to destiny, not to prophecy, not to the Force's will, but to each other, to the galaxy they shared, to the future they would build, not because fate demanded it, but because they decided it was worth building. The transmission ended, across Coruscant, across the Republic, across separatist worlds and neutral zones, and forgotten Rim territories. Billions of beings sat in silence, processing what they'd heard. Some rejected it, clinging to familiar certainties. Others embraced it, finding liberation in the absence of cosmic scripts. Most fell somewhere in between, uncertain, struggling, trying to figure out what it meant to live without guarantees. In the Jedi Temple, Yoda smiled softly. In the Senate building, Palpatine's plans adapted to new realities. On battlefields, soldiers kept fighting, but questioned their orders more carefully. In homes across the galaxy, families held each other closer, knowing that love wasn't destined but chosen. Khar's test was over. The galaxy had survived, not unchanged, not undamaged, but intact enough to continue. And perhaps that was the point. Not salvation, not destruction, just education. The hardest, most valuable kind, learning that you're smaller than you thought, less significant than you believed, but no less responsible for your choices. The Force was a river, not an ocean. The galaxy was one civilization among infinite others, and beings were just beings, flawed, limited, magnificent in their determination to matter, despite knowing how little they mattered in the cosmic scale. That was the price of truth, and the galaxy, stumbling forward into uncertain futures, paid it willingly. 3 years after Ko's departure, the Clone Wars ended,
not with the Republic's transformation into an empire, but with exhaustion. Both sides had lost too much, questioned too deeply, fractured too completely to sustain the conflict. The Separatist Council, no longer unified by Sith manipulation, that beings now questioned as just another form of destiny, negotiated genuine peace terms. The Republic, facing clone desertion and Jedi philosophical crisis, couldn't maintain occupation of contested worlds. The treaty was messy, unsatisfying, leaving border disputes unresolved and political tensions simmering. But it was peace, imperfect peace, chosen by flawed beings who'd learned that cosmic balance through violence was just another comfortable lie. In the Senate chambers where Palpatine had planned to declare himself emperor, politicians instead debated constitutional reforms, limiting executive power. Because when you couldn't blame destiny for tyranny, you had to build systems that resisted it. The galaxy hadn't become utopia, it had become uncertain. And uncertainty, painful as it was, proved more resilient than certainty ever had. Anakin Skywalker stood in the Jedi Temple's meditation garden, older now, scarred from battles, but not consumed by them. He'd made his choice during Order 66's attempted execution, when Palpatine had revealed himself as Darth Sidious and commanded the clones to exterminate the Jedi. Anakin had seen the vision, Ko showed him, knew what he could become. And when faced with the same temptation, power to save Padme from visions of her death, he made a different choice. He went to the Jedi Council, admitted his marriage, confessed his fears, asked for help instead of seizing power. The Council had been transformed by Ko's lessons. Instead of expulsion and dogmatic judgment, they offered compassion. Master Yoda himself suggested that perhaps the old rules against attachment were born from fear rather than wisdom. Attachment leads to suffering, Yoda had said slowly, but perhaps suffering we feared, not attachment itself. Love without possessiveness, care without control possible. This may be. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was humility. And humility was what saved them all. When Sidious made his move, Anakin fought beside the Jedi to stop Order 66's activation, to arrest the Sith Lord masquerading as their Chancellor. The battle was brutal. Not all the Council survived, but enough did. And the Chosen One brought balance, not through genocide, but through choice. Padme lived. Their children, Luke and Leia, grew up in a galaxy wrestling with its own nature, where the Force was taught as a powerful gift rather than cosmic mandate, where Jedi trained not as mystical authorities, but as servants of societies that didn't grant them unquestioned power. The twins never bore the weight of prophecy. They were just Force-sensitive children, learning to use their abilities responsibly, choosing whether to become Jedi without destiny forcing their hands. Luke showed natural talent and deep compassion. Leia inherited her mother's political brilliance and her father's determination. Neither was the Chosen One. Neither had to be. The prophecy had been fulfilled not through predetermined fate, but through a man who saw his worst possible future and chose differently. That was the balance Q had tried to teach them, not cosmic forces moving beings like pieces on a board, but beings creating balance through conscious choices, through moral courage without guarantees, through love that acknowledged loss without surrendering to fear. The Skywalker family was flawed, complicated, sometimes dysfunctional, but they were choosing their path, and that made all the difference. You're decades older now, still living on Coruscant, but in a galaxy that feels simultaneously more fragile and more genuine. Your children attend schools where history classes teach about Q's visitation as the Great Questioning, the period when civilization confronted its own assumptions and barely survived the revelation. Religious scholars debate whether Q was a teacher, a trickster, or something beyond such categories. Philosophers build entire schools of thought around his core question: can you be good without cosmic validation? You've watched the galaxy change in small, accumulating ways. The Jedi Order is smaller now, less centralized, more humble about its limitations. They still serve the Republic, but as advisors and peacekeepers, not as generals commanding slave armies. The clones, those who survived and chose to stay, formed their own communities, building lives that honored their brothers' sacrifices while refusing to be defined solely by war and Sith. The Order fractured when beings questioned whether power through hatred was enlightenment or just programming. Some dark side users still exist, but they're treated as criminals pursuing dangerous philosophy, not cosmic inevitabilities. The galaxy learned you don't need ancient mystical enemies to explain why people choose cruelty. Sometimes people are just cruel, and sometimes they choose better. Both are possible, neither is destined. The Force remains vast, mysterious, connecting billions of living beings, but Jedi teach it differently now. The Force is a river. Young Padawans are told in the temple's training halls, beautiful, powerful, worthy of respect. But rivers have banks. Beyond those banks exist other forces, other powers, other ways of being. We serve the Force not because it's universal, but because it's ours. Because we choose to align ourselves with life, with growth, with connection. Not because prophecy demands it, but because we believe it's right. That teaching produces different Jedi, less certain, more questioning, but perhaps more genuinely wise. They make mistakes, they struggle with doubt, but they don't hide behind cosmic authority. When their judgment fails, they take responsibility, they apologize, they grow. The Order that emerged from Q's intervention was smaller, weaker in some ways, but more honest, more human, even when its members weren't human. More willing to say, I don't know, and I was wrong. Those phrases, once anathema to Jedi authority, became foundations of new wisdom. Not knowing wasn't weakness, it was accuracy. Being wrong wasn't failure, it was opportunity to learn. That transformation, more than any battle won or prophecy fulfilled, represented the balance the galaxy truly needed. On Mortis, beyond normal space and time, the Father watched the transformed galaxy with something approaching satisfaction. His children, the son and the daughter, embodiments.
Dark and light had also changed, less certain of their cosmic significance, more willing to acknowledge they represented forces powerful within this galaxy, but not absolute across all reality. Q taught us humility, the Father said quietly, addressing the void where Q might or might not still observe. You showed us that our Force, magnificent as it is just one expression of existence among infinite others. Some might consider that lesson cruel. Silence answered him. Q neither present nor absent, having moved beyond this galaxy's concerns. But the Father sensed what Q would say if he responded. Truth is never cruel. Only incomplete understanding is cruel. The Father nodded to himself. The ones would continue their eternal balance, maintaining the Force's flow through this galaxy, but they'd do so with knowledge of their own limits. They were custodians of a local phenomenon, not universal powers, and perhaps that made their service more meaningful, not less. Because chosen service, freely given, beats conscripted destiny every time. That was Q's final lesson. 1. The Force itself had to learn. Anakin stood on a balcony, overlooking Coruscant at sunset, Padme beside him, their children playing in the apartment behind them. He thought about the vision Q had shown him, the burning temple, the dead younglings, the monster he could have become. That future hadn't happened, but it had been possible, terrifyingly possible. Every day, Anakin made choices that led away from that darkness, not because prophecy protected him, not because the Force guaranteed his goodness, but because he chose consciously and deliberately to be better than his worst impulses. Some days were harder than others. Some days he felt anger rise in him like a tide, fear for his family threatening to consume his judgment. On those days, he meditated not to surrender to the Force's will, but to remember love without control, strength without domination, power without corruption. These were choices, not destinies, and choices could be repeated, reaffirmed, chosen again, even after failures. Do you ever wonder if Q was right? Padme asked quietly, watching the same sunset, that none of this matters in the cosmic scale, that we're just one small galaxy among infinite others. Anakin considered the question. Yes, he admitted, but I think that's the point. We matter to each other. Our choices matter to the beings around us. That's enough. It has to be enough. Q, observing from dimensions the Star Wars galaxy couldn't perceive, smiled at Anakin's words. The test had been passed, not perfectly, not completely, but adequately. The galaxy had learned that cosmic significance wasn't required for moral behavior, that local meaning was sufficient, that beings could create value through choices, even when the universe provided no inherent value structure. Some civilizations Q tested collapsed under that knowledge, surrendering to nihilism when cosmic guarantees vanished. Others became tyrannical, deciding that without objective morality, power was the only truth. But this galaxy, flawed, fractured, forever changed, had found a third path: humility without despair, freedom without chaos, meaning without cosmic validation. They built their civilizations on the acknowledgement that they were small, limited, provincial, and from that foundation of honest self-assessment, they created genuine compassion. Not because the Force ordained it, not because prophecy demanded it, but because they chose to care about each other despite knowing how insignificant they were in the infinite cosmos. That Q reflected was wisdom, true wisdom, the kind that emerged not from certainty, but from doubt, not from power, but from acknowledged limitation, not from destiny, but from choice. The Force was a river. The galaxy was one civilization among countless others, and beings were just beings, small, mortal, magnificent in their determination to matter anyway. Q departed fully, leaving the Star Wars galaxy to its uncertain future. No final judgment, no cosmic grade, just observation and departure, because the greatest gift he could give them wasn't answers. It was the burden of creating their own answers. The freedom to fail, the responsibility to choose, the terrifying, beautiful truth that they were alone in a universe that didn't care, and that their response to that loneliness defined everything. The Force reached outward one final time, searching for Q's presence, seeking closure, wanting validation for the changes they'd made, and as before, it found nothing. Not because Q blocked it, but because some questions don't have answers. Some tests don't have grades. Some lessons simply are, waiting for beings brave enough to learn them, without guarantees of success. The galaxy learned, and in learning, found balance. Not the balance of prophecy, or destiny, or cosmic will, but the balance of beings choosing, day after day, moment after moment, to be kind when kindness wasn't ordained, to be just when justice wasn't guaranteed, to love when love came with risk of loss, to fight for what's right when what's right had no cosmic authority behind it.
That was the balance the galaxy needed. And Q, having taught it, moved on to other tests, other civilizations, other questions. But in the Star Wars galaxy, his lesson remained. You are small, your power is limited, your wisdom is incomplete, your traditions are local, but you can still choose to be good. And that choice, terrifying, responsibility-laden, free, is worth more than all the prophecies ever written. The Force flows through you, but you are not the Force. And that's okay. That's enough. That's everything.